So I recently finished up Dying Light 2, and it's a game that I wanted to discuss on the channel for a couple of reasons. One being, I adore the first game, which was a huge surprise when it came out back in 2015. It was such a weird idea combining open world and parkour movement and zombies, especially when the zombie game genre had been oversaturated by Dead Island and Dead Rising and Left 4 Dead, and all great games, some of them in their own right, but obviously we'd had a lot of them by the point 2015 had arrived. So when Dying Light came out and managed to be a fresh experience, that was such an awesome thing to be a part of. It's one of my favorite games of the last generation, so obviously, like many other people, I was looking forward to a sequel extremely. And did it live up to the original? In some ways, I think it did, but in others, I was left a little disappointed, and it's weird because I don't think I can pinpoint exactly why. Let's start with the basics though. General gameplay, I think, is quite good, very much building off of the first game. Parkour and free running all still feel great, it's fluid, gaining momentum I think feels how it should, and I was just rarely frustrated by the core movement system. And just like the first game, there's a number of different parkour skills that you can unlock, and yeah, I really, when it comes to this stuff, don't have too many issues, all generally pretty good. And we'll see how many times I bring this up throughout the video, but if you can say one thing about Dying Light 2, it is a true sequel through and through. It doubles down on what worked in the first game, and the parkour and the general weird concept that game was, that was the biggest strength of that game. The sequel takes all of that and just kind of goes with it. This core gameplay loop works, which if you ask me is the single most important thing for a game like this, and this is the main aspect that kept me wanting to play until I finished the story. Running around the city, climbing, fighting, gliding, just doing whatever I wanted. There were a couple of new additions like the paraglider, which is a cool idea, but it doesn't control as well as I'd like it to. It does the job, but I feel some of the mechanics could have been slightly refined a little bit. Also, the grappling hook returns and is certainly different than in the first game. In Dying Light 1, it was very much just a weird thing that zipped you right to your target, which, no, it doesn't make any sense, but man, was it super fun to use in that first game. And in the sequel, they changed it a little bit to where it's now like a rope that you attach to something and swing from it. It's still fun to use, but I would have loved if the mechanics of the original one could have been implemented in this game somehow. Moving on to combat, I feel a lot of this is mostly the same as well. I found the melee combat fun, and of course unlocking awesome abilities is still a blast. It does manage, I think, to recapture the pure fun factor of doing stuff like drop kicking zombies off of buildings, or just kicking any enemy you see in the head before you decapitate them or shoot an arrow through their head. All that stuff I think once again is carried over from the first game into this one very well. I will say there wasn't a huge enemy variety in terms of the human enemies that you're fighting. I never really felt like I had to approach encounters in different ways from each other unless it was clearly specifically putting you in a situation that was like, this is supposed to be stealth, this is supposed to be like a set piece. All that stuff was pretty much what you'd expect, and for whatever reason a lot of this didn't bother me, and I guess this is just kind of my personal mindset while playing through this game. Dying Light 2 has been my, get home, have some fun grinding out a single player experience with some fun movement, some fun parkour, which is something that I haven't done in a while. So that's just kind of the experience that I had while playing it. Combat's still enjoyable, but I would have liked adding a little bit more complexity to some fights with enemy variety and the way that missions are structured. So general gameplay, pretty fun, and like I said, this was by far my main motivation for finishing the game. There is a story, but it's not great. It starts with a bit of an interesting hook, but it quickly devolves into kind of a number of what I would say are like video game cliches. It just ends up being you meet some character you don't really care about, they send you on a mission to activate something, or find something, or meet someone, or just do some menial task. This is supposedly all in service of our main character's goal of finding his sister Mia that he got separated from when they were both kids. It's not the worst story ever told, certainly not even like video games. It's fine. The performances are all mostly good enough, it's just bland and forgettable. And I will say, they do really try with some stuff like bringing in big actors like Rosario Dawson, whose character at least held my attention a little bit in the game, and it does also do this by introducing choices that supposedly are supposed to alter the course of the story. And as you might expect, they do, but only to an extent. Like most games that advertise this though, it really does end up boiling down to 2 or 3 decisions throughout the game that pretty much decide what happens at the end. Again, the story is average as hell, but the game relies on you caring about the characters and the factions in the game to make these decisions. However, I feel like when most players are faced with these decisions, or like which faction they're going to side with, they're just going to end up choosing what makes the game more fun. They don't care less about the peacekeepers or the survivors or the different characters on each faction side. They just want the fun stuff in the world, or the fun car bombs, or the fun stuff that makes you like paraglide longer. In other words, they just want what makes the game fun. They don't really care about the story, which I think is kind of putting its like the game structure and like the choices relation to the story and gameplay kind of at odds with itself, because a lot of people, like I said, aren't gonna do it based on story, characters, and writing. Now, this isn't to say that the first game had a great story either, because it didn't, but it certainly motivated me to keep playing more than the story in this game did. It was a relatively simple and played out narrative, but I do think it worked for that game, and I still remember moments from it pretty well even years later. I also think that Roger Craig Smith playing the lead in the first game did a lot to really add something to that story and the character of Kyle Crane. Again, the story in Dying Light 2 isn't abysmal or anything, it's just extremely bland, and I could see many people just skipping all the cutscenes in order to play the game faster. Yeah, I guess you'd still be playing all the missions devoid of any real context or emotion, but I feel like you could still just have lots of fun with the gameplay during the missions. Like I said before, the structure of the game is pretty repetitive, but I found just barely enough cool standout moments or set pieces or big things happening that kept things fresh for me. The rest of the content in the city I think is pretty solid though. There's blueprints to find, side quests to do, parkour challenges to complete, all just good, solid, enjoyable content that if you enjoy the main gameplay loop that once again I've said I think was generally well done, you will enjoy all the side content as well. Now of course the name of the game is Dying Light, because once the sun goes down, the streets are a living hell that you probably won't survive. And I found the night in Dying Light 2 to actually not be as much fun as in the first game. I like the challenge that it posed in the first game, as that was kind of the point of a lot of the game, but in the sequel, the nighttime just feels a little bit too easy. I believe now the volatiles only come out until like a level 3 chase or something, and they're not just roaming around the streets, and it just doesn't make it as like intense or scary or tense being out in nighttime in the second game as it did in the first. And it's just a bunch of weird stuff like that that I feel like kind of keeps me from fully loving this game as much as I want to. In case you can't tell, I do like it. It is the most I've played a single player game in a while, and I do think that it recognizes most of the biggest strengths of the original game. Gameplay, once again, is all around solid. Technically, it's pretty sound, never had any huge issues with bugs or anything like that. And yeah, the story is boring for lack of better words, but no one's really playing this for the story, and I feel like even if you are disappointed by the story, it's not doing anything offensive or out of this world that's gonna like shock you or make you upset or like hate it or anything. It's just an average game story, which is not uncommon in this genre. So the question is then, why for me, and I know a lot of other people out there, is this game not hitting the same way the first one did? So much of it is extremely similar, but when I went back to the original game to play it and try and figure out some of these questions, I did have a few observations. One is the setting. Villador in Dying Light 2 is decently fun to explore, and yeah, it seems like adding large-scale buildings and environments would be the natural place to take a Dying Light sequel. But I feel like Haran in the first game had much more longevity and much more just interesting sights to take in and run around in, and it was just a much more interesting setting. The architecture, the way it was set up, yeah, in the first game Haran wasn't as big as Villador, but I feel like it was much more fun to be in, and if there was a section of the city like this in Dying Light 2, I feel like that'd be very welcome. Something else may just be the novelty of the first game. Like I said at the beginning, back in 2015, this was an extremely new game that although it took elements of a lot of what's come before, it was this one experience that it made that was so interesting and so much fun, and that flew under many people's radar. It wasn't until years later when a lot of the DLC had come out that a lot of people got into the game and discovered just how awesome it was. It was an unexpected hit when it came out, and it got people very accustomed to what to expect in a Dying Light game, quote unquote. So when the sequel is largely the same, maybe it just didn't innovate enough. Maybe there weren't enough new additions, or maybe they played it just a little bit too safe with a lot of the gameplay mechanics. And maybe we just need to give this game some time until it gets awesome DLC like the following DLC from the first game. It could be a million things, but I do think this is a very interesting case because I have seen a lot of other people online share my sentiment. It is no doubt a solid sequel and definitely a fun single-player adventure with a fun gameplay loop. It does have its flaws, but the parkour zombie gameplay works and is still fun. However, I am still left a little disappointed, especially since the first game means so much to me. Either way, I am looking forward to the first year of DLC. Techland has proven that they are dedicated to long-term support, and hopefully there will be some incredibly fun and memorable DLC, and I don't think we have to worry too much about that. If you have played Dying Light 2, what did you think about it, and for you, how does it compare to the first game if you played that one? Let me know all that in the comments down below, and thank you guys for watching Majestic Gaming.